What I want to try to share with you over the next 60 minutes is some of the passion and concern that I have over what we're doing as training professionals. I cut my teeth. My background, as some of you know, I'm a neuroscientist and took my doctoral work in neuroscience at Duke University. In fact, our keynoter from earlier today, the perception guy, we were classmates. And so we still don't agree on much. It's been 20 years and we still don't agree on things. And I want to try to talk some about that and the differences between the approaches we take and why it matters. And our focus, my focus, is I think there's only one meaningful goal for training. All trainings, if we're teaching and training, there is only one meaningful goal. And it comes out of the work. We are doing intervention work in Southern Africa right now. We're working with the Center for Disease Control on HIV problem. 42% of our people in Zimbabwe, 42% of our people have HIV. Virtually all of those people will be dead in 5 years. That is the magnitude of the pandemic, which is across all of Southern Africa right now. We have some problems in East Africa. We have lots of problems in Asia. Southern Africa has the worst pandemic in the world. And my focus, I think the stuff we heard about today in the perception lecture is terrific for gaining new insights into ourselves, into our self-understanding of reality. That said, I've got 1 million orphans in Zimbabwe, and I'm likely to have 3 million orphans if we don't change the behavior of individuals within that country. We don't need antiretrovirals. We do not need medical care. We want palliative care for the people who are dying, clearly. We've got to change behavior in that culture. And if people behaved differently, fewer people would die. That's the magnitude of the challenge that we face in that part of the world. Is it any different, I ask, when we're doing training in the US as corporate trainers? It is not our goal to teach people about effective leadership. It's not our goal. Our goal is to make them effective lead. We want them to lead effectively. Don't know about effective leadership, lead effectively. Don't know about compliance, comply. At the end of the day, this training that we are doing, we're putting so much effort into our training protocols. And we deliver a lesson, and then we check it off. Checkbox, took the course, thank you, you know. And all of us know, in some deep way, that a lot of the efforts that we're putting out are not paying off as well as they ought to. And we are committing our careers. We are committing our professional careers to be teachers and trainers. There is no greater calling than to be a teacher or a trainer. There is no greater calling. It is the greatest compliment and the greatest responsibility to be a teacher. And I love that word. Whatever synonym you prefer, that word, the idea of teaching. But to what end? And what I want to try to talk about today, and I'll make all the slide sets available, my whole slide collection. You'll see at the end of the talk, I make the whole thing available to folks. I try to do it at the end so that, because there's some surprise demonstrations and things, I don't want to give away my thunder, but I'll give you access to all the materials and so forth. But what I want to try to talk about is, if you are dissatisfied with your learners, if you are thinking they are not taking home enough information, if they are not changing their behavior in the way you want them to, do you really think that that problem is going to be solved by the next edition of Captivate? If you finally get that very special snap to grid feature, suddenly your people are going to take home messages and they're going to behave more effectively and your organization's going to be more efficient and profitable. The answer, sadly, has very little to do with technology. The answer has to do with a better understanding of the human being. And this is where he and I agree. We agree on a lot. But fundamentally, for him, it ends. If you increase self-understanding, that's enough. Coming to a better understanding of the holistic view of perception is enough. And it probably was for me until I spent a long time working in Southern Africa and watching people passing away needlessly. And then suddenly it became really clear to me that we have a much higher calling. And so what I'm going to try to do today is to talk about what you can do to ensure that your training transfers. You train, what do you do next? After you've delivered the training, then what? And the then what is as important as the training. So we look here, training after training. Everybody knows that human beings do not learn in a single pass. You bring something in, you learn about it, and about 70% is gone within the first day. 50% of memory is lost in the first hour, 70% in a day, 90% in a week. That's new data by Hermann Helmholtz, 1895. We have known since 1895 that memory is lost at a precipitous rate. And we keep doing it. We keep teaching either fully aware or in denial of the fact that everybody forgets the same stuff that people forget at the same rate that we do. Our learners do. You know how fast it goes. Come on, how much do you remember if you went to a session yesterday at 10 o'clock? How much is still there? It evaporates. And yet, we continue teaching our people that way without giving sufficient thought. And the preamble will stop in a minute, but I'll get into the details of how to do it. But it's like you've got a car, and it's got a hole in the gas tank. But you drive up to, and you fill it up, and as you're doing it, of course, it's draining out the bottom, but that's okay. You fill it up and you drive away, and you complain a lot that your car gives you lousy mileage. So what do? I know what I'll do. I'll use premium fuel. That'll make the difference. And so what we do in the world of training is that we know our people are forgetting precipitously. We know that no matter how good our training is, they will be forgotten. So we get the next version of Captivate. That'll do it. Now you got to plug the darned hole. Stop allowing the leak. And that's exactly what we're going to talk about today is what is the leak, what is the nature of the memory leak, and how do you stop it? And I think with some degree of confidence, I can say this, if you do your appropriate after training, this will be the single biggest ROI, return on investment, for your organization. Our goal is it's one training. We often think our job is here, training. But after training involves two more words, not just training, but retention and transfer. And those words almost never appear in the names of these conferences. We never talk about the transfer, the retention conference. It's training, as if that's enough, and it's not. All right. And it is a fairly large audience, but I could see everybody, and if a hand goes up, as long as I can keep my pace up, I'm absolutely willing to answer questions or, better yet, answer disagreements. Because if you want to disagree with me, that's even better. After training, I'm going to divide it. So my point is this, the thesis is, what you do after training is more important than what you do during training. Now, that may be fairly provocative since we spend much of our time building the training, but it's already good enough. What you do after training is more important than what you do during training. So let's have a look at a few here. I'm going to break it into three kinds of after training processes: cognitive reinforcement, social reinforcement, and behavioral reinforcement. And if at the end of the day you want your people be remembering what you taught them, changing their behavior, then these are the three kind of steps that I'll be talking about. Okay, so there are many kinds of trainings. We can do live, we can do e-learning, we can do webinars. but all training has one thing in common, and that is the forgetting curve. That's the rate. This is Helmholtz's original data from 1895, and we calibrate at immediate recall this area here. We define it as 100%. What can you remember immediately after a training seminar, reading a chapter of a book, doing an e-learning exercise? We define that, the immediate recall, as 100% recall. If by definition that's 100%, that is the rate at which that data, that information no longer is available to us. So after this is 60% is available after 20 minutes, after 1 hour, half of it is available, and so on. That should be depressing. It is the dirty secret of training. It's the thing we don't talk about. Yes, we have a big budget, but you know what? It disappears. So what can we do? How can we address that issue is the point at hand. 70% of all training is lost within 24 hours. The mantra, it's an inevitable fact. By the way, completely independent. Some people think, well, my learners I have a highly educated group. The forgetting curve is independent. Forgetting curve is utterly independent of IQ. The reason is because high IQ folks pull more in to start with. So they pull in more, but their rate of loss is the same as people who pull in less. So this is not, and it's not a problem of motivation. As we will see, forgetting from a neuroscientist's point of view is not a failure. Forgetting is a normal, natural, and adaptive process. Forgetting curve. We want ultimately our people to not know about effective leadership, but lead effectively. If they can't even remember our training, of course they're not going to take it home and use it in the workplace. So an effective retention program is at least a necessary step toward long-term transfer. So the question becomes this: why do we forget so much? And this is the world that you encounter every day. It's chaotic, it's noisy, you cannot possibly comprehend all of it. And your brain is in the business of purging information. You don't want to hang on to every sensory and memory experience that you encounter, because if you attempt to, you end up with enormous interference. So, are you staying at this hotel? What's your, Ted? Ted, you staying at the hotel? Yeah. Do you know your room number that you're staying in here? I do. When's the hotel you were at prior to this one? When's the last time you were at a hotel? What room number were you in, please? 11. Ted has no idea what room number he was in the previous hotel. And that's good. You don't want that information. The fact that his brain has purged a non-essential piece of information is appropriate. Because if he retained at immediately every hotel room he's ever stayed in, the hotel room number, he wouldn't have a chance. The amount of interference which would be present would prevent him from being able to retrieve information appropriately now. And so when I speak in a casual way, I can tell my wife, oh my goodness, I forgot the milk, my memory failed me. Well, but when we're talking technically in neuroscience, we don't say forgetting, we do not ever say forgetting is the failure of memory. It's not. Forgetting is an adaptive, natural, and important process. Ted has a comment.
The idea of photographic memories, how does that work into this?
I could try to get to that a little later. Okay. Eidetic memory is a different kind of memory and very rare, darn interesting, but for most of it's not relevant, so let me try to hold it for later. Cool. Memory then. Forgetting is not the failure of memory. Forgetting is a natural, a necessary, and adaptive process. Tons of information comes in, and your brain cannot possibly remember all of it. You don't want it to, and your brain is in the business of saying, irrelevant, irrelevant, irrelevant. You guys you do this every single moment. Right now, you have a flood of information coming from all kinds of sources, and you're ignoring most of it. For example, there are neural impulses coming to your sensory memory from your left ankle right now. Information has been sent to you from your left ankle. Yep, he's moving his legs. What's that left ankle doing? Right now, There is sensory information coming in from the last time you inhaled. That information is coming up. When is the last time you blinked? Pay attention to your blinking. Don't forget about your ankle. You get the sense, right? Your sensory system is inundated with so much information, it cannot possibly hold all of it, and it ignores irrelevant things. And that's good. That's an adaptive behavioral process. Your brain rather, devotes enormous energy to ignoring things. The proof of that is if you've ever walked into a room that has old fluorescent lights in it. They go zzz, and it's an annoying sound, but you ignore it, okay? When somebody comes and flips that off, you do, oh, goodness. You weren't even aware they were on anymore. But when somebody removes that stimulus, your brain had been devoting enormous energy to ignore. So that's an important, the ability to ignore or to forget is critical. There is a disease that you've heard of, which is a disease where people are unable or lack the inherent ability to ignore stimuli, where all stimuli are equally important. It's not the obvious one. Go ahead, what is it? Nope, it's a different kind of disorder. This is where every stimulus that comes in is equally salient. Yes, it's autism. At its core, and come on, we know by knowing the numbers in here, there's at least probably 15 families of folks in here who are profoundly affected by autism. It's a pervasive problem. And the experience of an autistic child is one where every stimuli that comes in is equally salient. Now, can you imagine what the personal experience is if everything, your ankle and your breathing and the sound of that fan and my voice and the odors was equally relevant? You would withdraw. Or you would stim. This is called stimming, it's stimming behavior, or self-abuse. This is what our autistic children do because they are unable to selectively attend and prioritize stimuli. So, the premise then is that forgetting fast, I don't want you to think of that as our enemy anymore. That's natural, it's normal, it happens to people of all IQs, of all languages. Forgetting is right and it's natural and we cannot get past it. The key is, don't forget, don't throw away the baby with the bathwater. We want the brain is throwing things away in a relatively, using an algorithm. That's a good way of thinking of it. Your brain is throwing away information, throwing away the things it figures it doesn't need. And it does it a lot. It throws stuff away. Come on in, there's plenty of seats. It throws away tons of information, but in the process, sometimes it throws away the baby with the bathwater. What I'm going to try to show you today is how the brain does that, and in turn, how we can leverage that to our advantage. Okay, so a lot of this, one of my heroes in the field is a guy named Henry Roediger. And the two people you hear most about that I worked with were Henry, who does memory research, and another psychologist named B.F. Skinner, who did work in the areas of behavior change and cultural design. And so it's kind of a synthesis of Henry and Skinner that we're going to talk about today. How do we take our training, make them retain it, his specialty, and then transfer it so we behave differently? So again, this is, I talk way too much. It's a bigger audience, so stop me. Questions are cool, okay? Questions now. Somebody, I'm requiring one. There's one back there, first one up. Thank you, sir. Sensory motor training shows a different pattern. So the question was, is the forgetting curve similar across training types? Most verbal training types, the kind of thing we normally do, shows a similar loss. Sensory motor training, where you're training somebody to drive a forklift, shows a different kind of pattern. So that would be a different kind of conversation. One more, all the way back right. Absolutely it's not only common across cultures, it's common across species. We can do a series of trainings. It's very interesting. Obviously, those are not verbal trainings, but we've tested it across all kinds of species because it's from mammals up. we have brains that operate the same way, which is take in lots of information, purge most of it. And the rates of forgetting are very similar. So if this is the forgetting curve, and this is, in some sense, the enemy, how does the brain decide what to keep and what to lose? You evolved. Okay, I'm wearing a hat right now that says you evolved. Okay, we can have over a beer a conversation that's about design and all that, but when I'm a scientist, I'm assuming we are an evolved organism. Your brain has evolved protocols that define when and where to forget things. What does it forget? Non-essential. How does it define non-essential? What's that? Survival. Certainly things which are conducive to our survival are deemed important. How else, in a more detailed way? Whether you've, oh, who said that? Yes. Have you accessed it? Now, there's an interesting tool. So the brain could say, if you don't use it, lose it. Great little tool. The brain could, that is a reasonably adaptive biological strategy. You bring in new information, you bring in tons of it, the brain says, cool, okay, I'm going to get that, I'll record that information. Kept it for a few hours, kept it for a day, hasn't been accessed, purge it. And it is as if you metatag data when you store it in the brain. We don't know what, there's 100 billion neurons up there, and it's going to be a lot of neuroscientists who tell you they understand how it works. God's truth is I don't even know how we cannot explain how I picked up that pad of paper with the brain. We are infants in our understanding of neuroscience. But what I can do is I can speak in metaphors, and I can say our brain acts as if you get in a piece of information, you store it. If it is accessed, you're utilized, the brain metatags it and says, hey, we used this once. Keep it around a little longer. So we can think of it like this. If you provide, these are memory retention here. Under normal circumstances, as I've described, this is the precipitous forgetting curve over days. However, if you provide the learner with a booster experience, go off and ask them a question about it. Say, hey, according to yesterday's presentation on Gantt charts, trying to get practical examples, under what circumstances is it most appropriate to apply a Gantt chart solution? A, B, C, D. Now, that's a quiz question. Takes the person a few seconds to answer it, and they get it right or they get it wrong, but what's important is that they thought about your seminar in the day after it was given. That is a retrieval opportunity. Technically, we call it an effortful retrieval. The brain has to go back and think about, what was it? Oh, yeah, it's B, I got it. That process metatags the data so that the brain is less likely to purge it. And I cannot tell you how, this is an enormously powerful effect. So when you provide that booster event, real data, this is Henry's data, you reset memory. And when you provide a booster experience, it resets memory and reshapes the forgetting curve with dramatic return. Now, you're still getting some loss. You're still getting loss across here, and so you provide another booster experience a few days later, and it too resets the forgetting curve. And each time you give the person a retrieval opportunity, it tags that information, don't purge it. And we will talk in a few minutes about actually how to go about delivering boosts, what should the boost consist of, how often do you do it, how do they change over time. But the take-home message at this point is the failure to provide some after-training program means your people will be left to their own devices to forget your content. With relatively painless after-training protocols, you can dramatically enhance their long-term retention. This is one way we do it. I'm going to show you ways you can do it with Gmail and Google Forms for absolutely free. Yes?
Is there some
Please.
magic number where we cross the threshold of boosters? Like say after 6, 7 boosters, we cross the threshold into possibility?
So the question is a threshold question. How much boostering is good? What Henry shows us is it's diminishing marginal utility. The first boost you give gives you the best return on investment. Every subsequent boost increases long-term probability of recall, but it diminishes. And so what we end up talking about with people is we train for an organization that introduces 70 new products a month. And they're training on 70 products a month. People cannot deal with that many boosts. And so what we're doing is their level 1 products get quite a few boosts. Other ones maybe get 1 or 2, because you cannot flood a person with too much information. You get lack of payoff. And so it's trying to, how much can your learners withstand? What are they willing to tolerate? And trading that off against the long-term pedagogical advantage. Here's one way you can deliver it. We send out booster questions. You look and they show up on your iPhone, and it's really simple. One, you go there, you click, quiz for today. According to training, the first step in consensus leadership is A, B, C, D. Person thinks about it. I think it was B. That process of retrieving it, just tag that information is important. And then they get instant feedback, okay? 2 things were just accomplished. 2 things. First, 3 things were just accomplished. Watch this. If you deliver training in this way, these are 3 things that you have just accomplished. 1, by sending out these interactive quizzes with people in the hours and days after training, the first thing you accomplish, which is the big honcho, you reinforce their memory. Simply by retrieving that memory, the person says, oh yeah, and that process makes it likely they're going to be able to recover it in the following weeks and months and years. Second thing this does, if they get the question wrong, you know you're providing them immediate feedback. That's corrective feedback. So you ask them a series of questions. They retrieve it. That process of retrieving reinforces the experience. And right or wrong, you give them corrective feedback that immediately tells them, oh, no. Actually, the point of that was this other thing. And you've corrected it. The third thing you've accomplished. Now, the first thing is you booster it. The second thing is that you are providing corrective feedback. But the third thing is you can look at your whole crew of learners. And you know what? If 60% of them are getting the answer wrong, that's your fault. And so it provides an internal check on the efficacy of your training. What you do after training is more useful and more valuable to your organization than what you do during training. And we have this, one sec. We have this vast opportunity that's utterly underused. And interact with the learner after training, and you can get enormous amounts of information. There'll be a fourth one here. A fourth advantage. The first is boost. Second is reinforce the right answer. The third thing is internal feedback. Thank you. I'm making this up as I go. Oh, the presentation, not the content. But the fourth thing is the nicest of all because it generates budget. And I'll get to that in a little while. Yes, ma'am, you had a comment back there. Okay, so if anybody here who was in my the pre-convention workshop, cool. I got a question for you, okay? Ready? We did a demonstration with these guys where I turned to them and said, do me a favor, don't even listen, don't try to remember anything I'm about to say, okay? I have a question for you. A TV actor, okay? A direction, a color. No effort. We did 16 items. I could have done 95 items. And there's some it's cool when you understand the heuristics of the way the brain works. You can train effortlessly and then reinforce it. People remember tremendously. They were not forewarned on this at all. So we could do a whole, we'll do one more. A sport. A city. A state? Cool. Thanks, that's really cool. When you're building, doggone it, and I didn't say this at the beginning, we're building for the human brain. When you're building a chair, anybody who's designing chairs, they're worried about the heuristics of the user, right? The human factors. And so if you're building a chair, you study the shape of the butt and the curve of the spine. You have to, because that's what you're building for. So if you're building training, and if you're building things for human beings, you gotta study the brain. You gotta know the way human beings comprehend things. And so much of the stuff we do, I gave them another demonstration with another 16 words. They aren't gonna remember any of them, because I taught it the wrong way. And when you teach the right way, learning is super easy. Yes, sir? That one, that's called opening an cognitive a priori gap. And it has to do with pre-training and context creation and how to imply. I'm sorry, that's just not this topic. I do a whole seminar on it. I'll show you at the end. I also have a whole series. We are creating a neuroscience online free neuroscience and learning institute. Lots of online lessons. A lot of us talking about how we can improve the world by making our teaching more effective. So I'll share that with you at the end. Yes, thank you.
Does the learner have to be directly engaged for it to be a boost? For example, if we take them to a collaboration tool where there may be a discussion on the training versus them being asked a direct question, does the recall happen the same way?
What we know is that effortful processing, it's the best phrase to remember. Anything which causes them to interact meaningfully with the content and exert effort with it will meta-tag that information and make it more likely to be retained. Give you an example. We are working, I'll be right there. We're working with Cengage Publishing, I can say that now. It's the biggest higher ed publisher in America. They publish all the overpriced textbook for university students. And the minute you finish reading chapter 7 of Jim Callett's book, An Introductory Psychology, the minute you stop reading it, you start forgetting, right? And that's just the nature of the human being. As soon as we stop learning it, we instantly begin forgetting it. So what we're doing with them is, at the end of every chapter now, there's a QR code, and you sign in. You finish reading Jim's chapter 7, this QR code, you scan your phone over the QR code, and it says, hey, Jennifer, congratulations for finishing the learning chapter of Callett's book. When's your test, Jen? Next Thursday. Okay, Jen, we recommend that between now and then you receive 21 boosts. Cool with you? You bet. And then she'll be going, minding her own business, ding, comes in SMS or it comes in email, and there's a little quiz question. Gee, what's the optimal duration in classical conditioning? 1 second, 2 seconds, a half a second? She thinks about it, she answers. Bam. Very quick interaction. She gets in the whole book and all of their books now, as opposed to leaving a person the victim of forgetting after they finish reading a chapter. Why don't we just touch them occasionally? These little pokes. They're harmless, and they provide a great return on investment. So that's the engineering that we're putting into it. Yes, sir, you had a comment?
So does the unwillingness to be effortful explain why, despite reminding them repeatedly, this doesn't work with teenagers?
Okay, so the best lesson that Fred Skinner ever gave me. You've heard of Skinner? Okay. He was he's the greatest influence, except my parents, the greatest influence of my life. Skinner used to put pigeons in boxes and then predict what their behavior was going to be under certain levels of reinforcement. And Skinner had a thesis. He said, you know what? If the pigeon doesn't do what I expect, if he doesn't behave in ways that are consistent with my theory, the pigeon is right and I'm wrong. The pigeon is always right, was his thesis. And I think there's something about that in teaching and learning. If our students don't learn, it's our fault. And my colleagues can complain all day long about our students being, one of my students is here, is a university student. Are you here? He didn't show. I saw one of my university students in the hallway earlier. If they don't learn, it's my fault. And we can complain about them being undermotivated or privileged or entitled or lazy. And now what? Those are your students. Maybe they are entitled or maybe they do feel privileged. So what? Now that's who I have to teach. And I got to find ways to motivate those people. And so do they disengage? Sure. So you know what we do? We have a leaderboard. And if you answer a quiz question, you get 3 points. And if you make a verbal short answer statement in there, that's worth 10 points. And if one of your colleagues thumbs up and says that's a good idea, you get more points. And what you have to do, if people are understimulated or unengaged, now what? Let's find ways to engage them. If they get enough darn points, this is hard to admit, but if they win enough points, a little puppy comes from the corner of the screen, runs up and licks the screen. And people will participate to see, to win badges, to be on a leaderboard, to get a dog to lick their screen. So this is the other part. How do you get people to engage? If they are disengaged, we have to find ways to get them participating. Now, so this is another, you can also ask polls. Quiz questions aren't the only way to do it. You could ask a poll. What's the best way to motivate an underperforming employee? Reward small successes, gentle threats, direct threats, peer pressure. What's your opinion? You answer, the person comes in, they answer, and they can immediately compare themselves to their peers. And it's kind of fun. You have an opinion, you look at what other people have as their opinion and say, that's okay, that's interesting. You could sort this by gender. What's important here is that I have my learner interacting with the content and thinking about it. And this might have taken place a week after the training. But they say, oh, okay, I'll tinker with that a little bit. That's a good idea. Now, what kind of hypocrite would I be if I were to do this and give this lecture and not boost it? I could be here preaching and evangelizing and not boosting it. And so what I've done is I have pre-authored. I've given this lecture before. I've pre-authored probably 7 or 8 boosts. I then have those questions pre-authored. I simply go into the program. I add anybody's name who wants it, and the program handles dispatching the emails over the following days and weeks. I don't even think about it again. And so this is what I would encourage you guys to do with your organization. We have a software tool that does it, MindMarker. There's competing tools. Mine's called Boosterlearn. MindMarker was over in the expo. They do a fine job. There's other ones out there, QLink, something like that. They do the same kind of thing. And they are software tools, but I'm telling you, if you have a small enough organization, you can do it yourself with Gmail. Just interact with people, touch them. Ours is optimized for all kinds of psychological things to get the maximum effect. Do anything. Touch your learners in the hours and days after training, and if you do so, you'll get enormous increased retention. Yeah? If you have zero access, what do you mean, post-training? Yeah, I mean, that's a challenge. We work with a variety of organizations who are not allowed to send emails, or their line employees do not have access to email. Then what we often do in those situations is we set up a booster program through their managers, and then their managers are indirectly. It's harder because then I'm managing a person who's managing a person. But if you have no other access, that's your best bet, is to try to set up, and you can do it either with these kind of heavyweight programs or just sending out booster questions to managers who are then responsible for going out and soliciting things from their employees and reporting back to us. So that's how we've used this. The game here is, if you've delivered training, interact with them after training. If you have to do it through a middleman, i.e. a manager, that's the way to get access to them. In our tool, you could send them YouTube videos, you could send them. These are, and this will address, I'll be right there. Let me finish this thought and I'll come back, okay? This gets to my fourth advantage, a potential power of boostering. And I should preface, let me back up one step. I suggest if you're going to send out booster experiences, you break them into a 2-2-2 methodology. 2-2-2. 2 days, 2 weeks, 2 months. And the nature of the information you are sharing varies at 2 days, 2 weeks, 2 months. At 2 days, I want you sending out simple recognition questions. Something simple, again, like a quiz question, a multiple choice, or a fill in the blank. They're simply going to recognize the correct answer from a list, click it, that's enough. Furthermore, I'm getting a little bit ahead of my slides, but it's okay. So you're going to send out at 2 days. It can be like day 1, day 2, day 3. In there, you're sending out a series of short recognition questions, simple multiple choice questions. Well, how much work, how much time should they spend on them? We've got some really nice data. And this is important. So I'm sending simple recognition questions. Henry did an experiment. He had his students learn content, and then he divided them into 4 groups. One group got no boosts. One group got 5, the boosts lasted only 5 seconds. Third group got boosts that lasted 30 seconds, and the fourth group got boosts that lasted 5 minutes. And the comparison was, who remembers best? The group that got no boosts, 5-second boosts, 30-second boosts, or no boosts, or 5-minute boosts. Who remembers best?
30 seconds.
As you would guess, the people who got no boosts remembered almost nothing. The people who got 5 seconds, 30 seconds, and 5 minutes, no difference. No difference. And they spent, you know why? And this goes to the very heart of what my message is today. When you train people, you are helping them what we call encode information. You train them, you give them new knowledge, they take that knowledge, they encode it, they put it in their brain. Once it is encoded, you do not need to give it to them again. It's been learned once. You do not need to reteach it. That's a huge mistake people make in after training, is that they reteach the material. They got it. What we have to do is tell the brain, you got it, don't forget it. And so what a lot of folks do, again, is you're going to send them these 5 minutes. Hey, you remember that 3-day seminar you sat through? Let's give you 5 more minutes of it. It doesn't help. In fact, it's probably a detriment because people are busy trying to do their jobs, and if they have to do something for 5 minutes, they are disinclined from participating. Furthermore, Henry's data says a 5-second boost is just as good as a 30-second or a 5-minute. Don't reteach it. Give them retrieval opportunities, because what you're trying to do is not re-encode. You're trying to simply give them opportunities to use it so they don't lose it. All of that said, then, I said at 2 days, we're sending out multiple choice questions, fill in the blanks, very simple, very quick. Just get them thinking about the content. An important part of this, then, let's say you gave them an hour lecture. If I asked them a question of something that happened at minute 21, so surely the thing that you boost gets reboosted, the topic, but everything in the entire presentation gets reinforced. And so boost doesn't just happen in a very discrete way over a single subject, but the entire topic gets reinforced. So that's what happens at 2 days. At 2 days, send out a recognition question, a question that's going to force the person to remember that information in an effortful way. At 2 weeks, I want the nature of the questions to change. At 2 weeks, you're no longer just getting them to remember a discrete fact. I wanted their question to be generative. It's a good word to write down. The first questions are recognition, recognizing the right answer. The second questions that go out at 2 weeks, they're generative. I want the person to have to think of an answer. I want them to try to think how, it's not just recognizing it from a list, it's generating it from their mind. A question like, hey, we gave you an anger management course. How can you imagine using that? Or a leadership course. How can you imagine using that in your day-to-day job? Now, That kind of question, which we would do, we just send out a multiple choice like question like, excuse me, a short answer question like this, and they fill it in. They have provided now not just a retrieval, but their processing and how to apply it into their day-to-day environment. So 2 weeks, I want a generative question. At 2 months, I want application. So we do this with a major big retailer. And we provided anger management courses to their employees. And we said, here's how to deal with grumpy customers. We went through a session. Then we sent them at 2 days quiz questions. True, false, multiple choice at 2 days. At 2 weeks, how can you imagine applying this? At 2 months, we came back and we asked them, give us examples of how you have actually applied these principles day to day. Well, we get testimonial responses from employees that are like, I took that man, I was dealing with a really grumpy customer last week, and she was very angry, but I remembered your course, and I turned the conversation around, and she ended up buying a wash machine from us. Whoa, that is gold. See, not only are we boosting her memory, not only are we able to correct any misconceptions she has, not only are we able to recalibrate our training, but we are generating testimonial data, that's called level 4 data of corporate ROI. By interacting with that learner and asking how have you used that to the company's benefit, you, as part of the training department, are pulling in information that you could take to the chief financial officer and say, here's some money that we're making because of the training we're delivering. We complain a lot that our budgets are too darn small. But at the end of the day, most of us work for corporations who are trying to make a profit. And it is incumbent upon us to demonstrate that we are revenue generating. That we are not just parasitic, that what we're doing for the organization is helping it profit. Yes, ma'am.
How does the job aid reference card, that sort of, it seems to be the silver bullet at our company. Oh, just give them a reference card, so they'll remember everything from the training. How does that, or does it even factor in?
So if we hand out a seminar, I'm assuming what you mean is that post-seminar we hand out a little card that has the main points on it. Yeah, turns out, very interesting data. If you read a chapter last week, the exam's tomorrow, what should you do tonight if you want the highest grade? Sleep might, depends. If you studied tired, you should take the test. You want to take the test in the same metabolic state that you were at when you studied it. It's kind of we could go into that, but I won't right now. Some very interesting data there. What else do you do? How do you prepare for the exam? What most people do is that when they read, they highlight. They paint their pages yellow. And then the day before the exam, they go back and reread their highlights. Almost no return. That's almost no benefit. It's encoded. And what we're doing is re-encoding the information. Better, somewhat better, is writing it down, rewriting it. That's a little bit better. But by far, what the data shows, take quizzes. Practice retrieving, because that's what brings it back. And so simply giving a person who has taken one of our seminars a summary of that seminar and handing it to them provides very little long-term retrieval. Because what we need is not for the person to run to their card, but for them to spontaneously know and how to apply. There was a gentleman who had his hand up, and I can't remember where you were, and I ignored you. Perfect, thank you.
What about application? 2 months, we do application. Give us an example.
Well, application would be like the one I exampled from the retail store. How have you used this information to improve the organization? And it's so valuable because you're actually making the tacit point, you know what, we're not teaching for fun. How is it that you're able to use this? And you're getting the person boosting and giving you feedback. Another lovely part, I got you back there, I'll come near the next. The lovely part of this, corporations think that training, because do I have it on this slide? I don't. We have a button on ours, right? So you type in your answer. Describe your best idea for getting an idea for employees to be more productive. After you submit your answer, You can then go take your cell phone, you submit your answer, and you go like this, sweep. Somebody else's answer. Oh, that's kind of interesting. I'm going to give that a vote up. You scan through it. Suddenly what we have done is we've created a community of learners. And people can upvote each other. It's very kind of like this millennia training where we actually teach people in ways that they're accustomed to with social learning. And they can see not only their idea, but other people's idea, vote them up, comment on it. I have 22-year-olds asking to go back to their e-learning because they're in the middle of a conversation. And with the risk of sounding corny, what we are succeeding at is we are providing employees, by allowing them to contribute, we are giving them the dignity of their job. We are saying you matter. We matter, we know the most. Corporate has a lot of experience and here's our expertise. But you know, we're interested in what you're thinking too. And what our corporate customers have discovered is that training doesn't just go this way. It's not just top down. It's peer-to-peer and it's this way. Because what they do is that they come along and they can skim off the top because these employees are looking at each other's suggestions and commenting and voting them up. And what floats to the top are darn good ideas. And all of a sudden corporate says, oh my goodness, never thought of this. And it changes the dynamic. If training is a one-off, top-down experience with no reinforcement, it's lost. It's simply forgotten. On the other hand, if you can create a relationship with your learner, thought of this one this morning, that concept, that it is a relationship where we're trying to grow together as part of an organization. And we can allow technology to support this creation of a message, training, and then an ongoing relationship to reinforce the memory. That gives you real power as a teaching group. Questions? Thank you.
So, did you see any difference in the percentage of learners who responded at each touch point, the 2 days, 2 weeks?
Okay, so a couple of the question, different responders and how they do. We'll be publishing, I am a columnist for, if you guys, this conference is sponsored by the eLearning Guild. I am a regular columnist for them in what's called Learning Solutions Magazine. So there is, I think back in March, April, May, I published a series of articles about booster learning. And I would encourage you to go back if you want to have a look at some of those. And I will actually, we now have data, real data from Verizon Wireless, Genentech, Novo Nordisk, Cengage Publishing on the efficacy of the program, where they've been actually deploying different booster systems, and the data is really, really strong. To not boost is sinful. I got to go there. Thank you for that help, and you are the man. You know, there's two answers to the question. First off, storytelling is an enormously compelling way to create long-term memory. People used to memorize the Bible or the Iliad and the Odyssey. And because they're poetic, they're stories, the human brain is really good at remembering those things. That best work is being done by Dave Rubens at Duke University. Fantastic research on the efficacy of storytelling. The second part of your question is, what about boostering? I don't know. It's an outstanding question. And I've never seen specific research looking at boostering of storytelling as opposed to more didactic knowledge. I'm going to answer more questions. I have a certain obligation to be at least fair. I love this stuff, so I'm going to hang around and talk to people. Let me get to some other, these are all the things I'm going to talk about in today's lecture. So I hope we'll go through it a little bit quickly. And this is just great. Depth of processing. I'll boost it, I promise. Yeah, this is.
Will this be available after the?
Yeah. This is what I got to get to because we're in a waning minute, so I have to get to the information, how to get access to this stuff. Oh my God, Art, shut up. We have videos, we have articles, we've got a ton of stuff to support this, and strategies for the best ways of when to send these things out. How to learn more. This is where I wanted to get to. We're at DevLearn now. I'm doing a 16-hour session actually at Training 15 in Atlanta, Learning Solutions, which is also part of the Guild. I'm doing an 8-hour one there and a variety of other seminars. In addition to this, this is the How to Learn More at the column, Learning Solutions magazine. This is, you can go find it. But if you're at all inclined, what we can do is I want to be able to boost folks. If you're interested in being, do I have another page here? I do, okay. We also do a lot of consulting services. If you'd like me to come out and talk to your organization, I do a fair amount of that, going out and talking to companies about how to focus the organizational strategy. So I'm happy to do that. We've got all kinds of products. If you want to know about anything, if you want to get boosted, just leave me an email address and I'll send it to the studio right after the session in a couple of days. You'll get the experience. And it's pretty darn dramatic. Once you begin to feel it in yourself, how much more you will remember a session that was boosted. And so I would encourage you to give it a try. If you want to get, so what I would ask you to do is leave a business card. If you're interested, leave me a business card or a piece of paper, your name, email address, and then anything you might want. If you want to get boosted, just say boost me. If you want articles, if you want the slides, if you want access to the slide set, I'll share. If you want me to come out and be a consultant, just write down at the end of the paper and I'll do that for you. I'm going to sit and answer questions now. Feel free to hand it to me up front or to that pretty blonde lady with the baby in her arms and my son next to her. And you can hand it to her on your way out the door if you have anything, or just put them up front. So I'm happy to send you whatever you need. But until they throw my butt out of here, I'm going to answer questions. So you can bring your name and stuff up there if you want to get boosted. Yes, ma'am. Hey, thank you so much.